welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hi. My name is Cheney and I'm a homeschooling mom to 3 kids, ages 12, 5, and 1. And today I'm actually going to share with you something a little close to my heart. So when I was looking into this whole homeschooling thing years ago before COVID made it popular, there wasn't very many resources out there, but there was a beginning growing YouTube community of homeschoolers. And among those, I found a woman who was very gracious to share both her reasons that she started to homeschool as well as the reasons why she continued to homeschool. And in that video, she had said that when she began, before she started her day, when she sat down and she wrote out her list of 10 reasons in no specific order as to why she was going to homeschool. And in her times of difficulty and when it felt like maybe this isn't working, maybe I shouldn't do this, maybe I should just put the children back in school, she would return to this list to remind herself of the reasons why this was the decision that she had made. And I just thought that was such a good thing to do, so I did it myself. Now, this document, I didn't write it on paper, I put it in a Google document on my phone, is dated November 6th, 2018, and the date currently is November 16th, 2021. So this is almost 3 years ago to the date, 3 years and 10 days ago, that I sat down and wrote this list out for myself. And so I thought I would share my reasons with you guys. Now, my reasons are very different from the reasons of that mom that I watched all those years ago, and they're probably very different from your reasons. And my reasons now have changed a little bit. You know, the world has changed very much, as well as, you know, our family culture and our living situation. Like, so much has changed in those years, but a lot of it may ring true to someone starting out, and a lot of it still rings true to me today. So in this video, I'm going to share with you those 10 reasons why I started to homeschool, and in a future video I will share with you 10 reasons why I continue to homeschool. So make sure you stay tuned for that video. So without any further ado, here they are, my 10 reasons in no particular order as to why I started to homeschool. Number 1, school violence and school bus deaths. Now, at the time, I remember this rereading it, school shootings were, it felt like at least a quarterly affair, if not a monthly affair, and they were getting dangerously close to where I lived, and there was a huge feeling of like, I kept watching all these news stories and there were people saying, you know, we never thought it would happen here. And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't want to be one of those parents one day saying, we didn't think it would be us, you know? And it was terrifying. It's still terrifying, the thought of. And at the time, my son was 9 years old. He was in 4th grade, and I actually pulled him out in the middle of the year. After Christmas break, he stayed home to homeschool. So at the time, he was actually going through active shooter drills at school, which, don't get me wrong, is a good thing and an important thing in a school if they want to be prepared for an active shooter situation. Just the fact that my 9-year-old had to be prepared for a murderer to come into this place that should be a safe space and kill him, it was just not a world that I wanted to be in, and it was not an environment that I wanted my child to grow up in. So that was a big thing. Also at the time, there were an alarming number of deaths in my area of children boarding school buses or people wrecking into school buses. So people driving around the stop sign and running over children as they were attempting to cross the road. It happened, I think, like 3 times in a row within like my tri-county area, as well as buses getting into school wrecks and children tragically dying in that. And it felt like it was like compounding. Like, if they didn't die trying to get on the bus, then they died on the way to school, or then they got to school and they got shot to death. Like in 2018, it was it felt like a very violent time. And then aside from that, even with like the actual threats, there were a lot of lockdowns and shutdowns for children bringing knives to school, and bomb threats happening to the schools. There was so much violence going on around the schools. It was a very scary time, and it was a really big deal. And I think it was one of the major selling points that I had to my husband, who wasn't necessarily all the way on board when I first brought this crazy idea of homeschooling to him. The amount of what felt like apparent danger that our child was in at school, it was a very big issue for me. So reason number 2 was decrease the likelihood of exposure to colds, flu, and lice. How funny is that to say in the year of our Lord 2021 after a pandemic struck, right? So that was something that I was thinking about that far back. And the school in particular that he was attending, there was a very large lice issue. Like, it felt like an ever-present problem at that school. Like, children just had lice and they like couldn't get rid of the problem. I have a lot of hair and it's a pest, I hate thinking about it. But also, it felt like we were always sick. Every time we would start to get over something, our son would bring something home from school, then my husband would get sick, then I would get sick, then my other son would get sick, and as soon as we all got over it, a new illness would be brought home from school. And it's amusing to me now to think about, because so many people ended up homeschooling for health reasons that it's funny to me that I was thinking of transmissible diseases in 2018 before it was such a large issue. Reason number 3 that I had was personalized curriculum and school schedule, which is still now a very big deal. I have been a stay-at-home mom and homeschooled. I have worked outside of the home and homeschooled, and I have worked from home and homeschooled. All of these different phases of our lives have been very, very different, and being able to adapt to different things that happen is very beneficial. Now, one of the reasons why I said that at the time, I remember, is because we unfortunately had lost some very close family members not very long before, and having to go through death and mourning, as well as some other personal things that my son was going through, which is a story for another day. But having to go through all of these like major life shifts and decisions, while also having to keep up this like incredibly demanding school schedule. I mean, he would leave before the sun came up, and he would get home right as the sun was going down. He had maybe an hour of sunlight left. So there was such a demand from school to keep up with that, while these, very big deal things were happening, and there was no leeway or grace to take a break to deal with what he was dealing with. And I just had this strong urge to give him a schedule that worked better for him, a schedule that, he could get academically what he needed to get done, but also have time to play and be a child. And, if he needed a break, or if he was going through something and needed a mental health day, he could take that, he could be given that. It really was important to me. Also, because my oldest son, who was the only one I homeschooled initially, he had a very specific situation to him, which led to him having a difficult road academically. So being able to personalize his curriculum to where we could fill in the gaps that he had missed earlier in his school age life, was something that was very important to me because it was dramatically affecting him later. Initially, when he started school with us, it wasn't so much of an issue, but further down the line, those gaps really started to show, and it was affecting him so much. So I really wanted to take the time, give him the time to take a step back and go through the process of filling in all of those blank spaces instead of him just being like, rather than some teachers saying, oh, you failed, why don't you know this already? Because that's what he was going through. And it was just very important to me to allow him time to take a step back, to process what was going on personally for him, and fill in the gaps of pieces of his education that he had missed earlier on in his education, and really allow him to gain confidence, grow as a person, and move forward. Reason number 4 that I had was limit negative influences and peer pressure. So I know this is a bit of a hot button topic because, or at least in my personal life, especially when I first started. Like I said, I know homeschooling is like a much more popular thing to do now, but it very much wasn't when I started. And I don't think very many, if anyone at all, positively reacted when I said, oh, I'm going to withdraw my children from school and educate them at home. But the biggest argument that I got against this at the time, I remember, was, well, you can't shelter them their whole life. And it's like, no, but, we also don't show 2-year-olds R-rated movies, We can't shelter them from that R-rated movie forever, but I think there is just cause to not play unedited Cardi B around your 5-year-old. To each their own. If that's your thing, I guess, fine, but not for me. And it is kind of our job to selectively give children freedom within limits. And for my husband and I both, we have this very strong opinion that there were people, friends, other children who came into our lives who were very, very influential, who should have been removed from our lives. But attending public school kind of makes that very difficult, whereas being able to really limit the type of influences that you have around your child. So this isn't to say that my children can't have anyone I disagree with around them. That's not true. My family unit, just in general, is full of people who strongly disagree with each other. My dad and I very strongly disagree politically, right? That doesn't stop us from cutting a turkey together at Thanksgiving, and we don't argue about it. And I think it's important for my children to hear varying points of view. However, I don't think it's important to have my children around children who have a home life that will allow them to expose my child to things that I do not want them exposed to. And I'm sorry, I know that probably sounds bad, right? Children can't help the way that they're raised, but we can help what we expose our children to. And particularly for my oldest child, he was being exposed to things from other children at school that he would never have been exposed to otherwise, and it would not have been a problem. And it's sad that some children know that kind of thing, but I don't need my child talked to about how the kid who sits next to him in class watches his mom do drugs. We don't need that. And I'm sorry for that child that does drugs. And my son and I can have conversations at some point about drug safety and saying no and the effects that drugs can have on people. But what we don't need is for my 9-year-old to, learn about adult topics from another child. We'll just put it that way. Reason number 5. Remove pressure and anxiety from test and grade method. So this was another very important thing for me. So my oldest son was having such a hard time with anxiety to the point where he was so terrified of getting an answer wrong that he would just shut down. Like if a teacher asked him a question, he would just completely shut down. He'd stare at her, he'd start crying, he wouldn't be able to talk. I was starting to get, called up to the school. So genuinely, it was something that was impeding the process. He was so terrified of that bad grade or not doing well on the test that it was leading him to a bad grade and not being able to do well on the test. Whereas whenever you homeschool, I don't need to test him, because when you're working with a child side by side every day, you have a pretty good ability to gauge whether or not they're doing okay. So removing that fear from exhibiting what he knows, right? It was just such a high priority for me, because I felt that it was being documented that he was unable to do things that I knew very well he was capable of doing. He was just terrified of the grade. He was terrified of not doing perfectly, and it was just debilitating, the anxiety that it was giving him. And I can say now, 3 years later, relieving him of that has done wonders for allowing him to come out of the shell that he had built around himself. Reason number 6, strengthen family bond. Now, yes, I will say yes. I think that has happened. I will say that siblings, now that my other children are older and I'm homeschooling them as well, siblings tend to get annoyed with each other far more quickly when they spend all day together. So rather than when you have your children are in public school and you're working, carving out time to spend with each other, it's sort of the opposite effect, where you have to make sure and carve out individual alone time where your children can get away from each other for a little bit. So I think that's interesting now, because I look for, how can I give my oldest some time to himself, or his brother isn't, crawling all over him, or no one's calling his name. Yeah, so it's interesting to me that I was looking for, we could all spend all this time together. I think too, because we're in year 2 of COVID now, so we've spent way more time together than I think we ever thought we were going to, and we still have a pretty good relationship coming out of that. So yeah, I would have to say that probably still rings pretty true. It's just amusing to me that at the time I did, because at the time when I was working and he was going to school, I went days sometimes without seeing my son, you guys, because he would leave early in the morning and I would get up, I would take my younger son to preschool, and then I would go to work, and he would come home while I was still at work, and then I would get home after he had gone to bed. So and for 3 days span, sometimes I wouldn't see my son, and it used to kill me. It used to drive me so crazy. Just not, I don't know how you guys are, but for me, going a day without speaking to my son, it eats at me. I didn't talk to my son today. I'm a terrible person. So we're many years away from that now, but if that is where you are right now in life, I feel you. It's a very difficult thing to do. Number 7, no bullying or being a bully. So I think this one kind of speaks for itself. No one's going to bully you for having acne, or for liking powder puff girls when you're a boy, or any of the silly things, what kind of clothes he chooses to wear, how he chooses to have his hair cut, whether or not he has an expensive $100 skin in Fortnite, or whatever it is the kids are bullying each other for these days. It just doesn't happen, because there's no social group to bully him. Now, that's not to say that he isn't exposed to social situations. Obviously with COVID it's a little bit more difficult, but there's something about taking a group of adolescent children and shuttling them into a room together for 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day actually, in our school district, that leads them to really want to belittle each other. So I just wanted to remove that. Also, I it was also possible that in some situations it was my 9-year-old who was the one partaking in the bullying of other children. And I think it's a vicious cycle that I wanted to remove him from. And I think that goes back to removing negative influences, because these are things that he has to be introduced to. I don't think that children are born bullying. I think it's a behavior that they see and they imitate. So it's not something that we've had to deal with. I don't think I've had to deal at all with my son feeling unable to be unapologetically who he is in a very long time. He, if he likes something, he's not afraid to be like, yeah, whatever, I like that, And I think especially now that we're in the middle school years, and I don't know if you guys have very fond memories of middle school, but I do not. And I don't think that he would have a very good time in middle school as well. So for him to be able to have the freedom to find who he is without all of this pressure around him from these social groups to be a particular type of way, or look a certain type of way, or keep up with the cool kids, it is what it is. A funny story, you guys, my middle schooler officially has acne, and I can't get over it. Like, I'm not ready for any of this, but no one has made fun of him for it yet, so it's a win. It's a win for us. Reason number 8, preserve their childhood. Again, I think this goes back to the negative influence thing. And I'm not going to spill all of my son's personal beans, but it was very much that he was being exposed to very, very adult things at a very young age. Not necessarily just at school, but just in general. It's clear that, allowing him to spend 9 hours a day with children who, maybe come from different families with different values and different values. I feel like that's putting it very lightly. My son was being exposed to very adult things, and I felt that his childhood was truly being eroded. And I have to say now, seeing my 12-year-old be a kid is really nice. It's really nice that he can just play with Legos and worry about, playing basketball and not who's dating who, or, fighting people. And there are fights in middle school often in his grade. And so the fact that the biggest thing that he has to worry about in a day is, taking a stick and digging in a yard is, it's a godsend. And I'm very happy that he is able now to just be a kid and not worry about any of these pseudo-adult issues that cultivate in a middle school setting. Number 9, I just have, this is very funny to me, I just have Don't Stay in School, Boy in a Band. Now, if you've never heard that song, I'm going to link it down below. But it is a song that moved me very much when I heard it. And it's funny because I haven't read this in a very long time. It's funny to me that this is on here because I actually this year re-listened to that song, and I listened to it to see if I could find any holes in the education that I was giving my child. Am I missing, what are the things that I'm missing out on? And it's the reason why I added in the health book from Abeka, because I realized that I wasn't doing a very good job of discussing health issues outside of just personal hygiene. So I wanted to talk more about macro, nutrients and meal planning and those types of things. It's hilarious. That's hilarious. I'm going to leave a link to that song below. If you're someone who's considering homeschooling, this song is not actually about homeschooling at all. It's about the public school system and a way to positively change it. But for me, it really hit home with the type of education that I was given, and it moved me to make certain that my children were given a better education for the whole person, and not, whoever's making the decisions for these standards. And number 10, my final reason was, oh, I love this. I love the way I wrote this. To make education a hobby and not a chore. And I think I have succeeded at that. I think I have succeeded because we love doing what we do, and if we don't love it, we don't do it. So if the second, and that's not to say I let my child get away with like not learning anything, but the second my son really starts to get upset and say, I don't want to do this, I don't understand this is frustrating, I go, okay. And I let him put it down, and we walk away from it, and I evaluate, and I decide, I always ask myself the question, is it worth the fight? Is this helping my relationship with my son, right? Is it productive to us having a good relationship with each other, right? I am not going to scream and fight with him to do something. If he doesn't want to do it, and I force him to do it, he's not learning anything other than I don't listen to his concerns. And that's just my opinion. But it has done wonders for my and my son's relationship and my son's approach to education. When we learn, he is genuinely excited. I wake up in the morning and he says, what are we going to do today, Mom? What's our opening activity for today? What are we going to learn about? What game are we going to play today? And just the difference from when I wrote this list of how much fun we have. He discovered Titanic about a year and a half ago, and he is obsessed with it. And we recently traveled out of state, and we actually went to a Titanic museum, and while there he bought 3 books about the Titanic and then requested that I read those books aloud to him. And the other day I came in and he was just watching a documentary about the making of the movie Titanic and how they got it wrong and whether or not they had gotten the sinking of the Titanic accurately. And while we were walking through the museum, my son was educating me. He was like, oh yeah, this is the company that owned the Titanic, and did you know that Titanic had a sister ship, and it was this, and these are the the measurements of the, what do you call them, the steam stacks? Is that what they're called? He would be so upset if he heard that I don't remember what they're called. But he loves it, and he watched a documentary for fun. I didn't tell him. I wasn't like, hey, there's this documentary out here. He was like, I want to learn more about this thing, and he sought out the knowledge. And that is genuinely how we learn. We are naturally curious creatures. And so the fact that he takes joy out of just learning more about a topic is so fun to me. He reads so much now. Like I buy him one of those Who What's books, it's done by the end of the night, and he just devours books. This is not the child that I started with. So I have to say, I genuinely think that in a way I have succeeded in making education a hobby for him rather than a chore. And that makes me very happy. So we went on this journey together, you guys. Because rereading it, I think, one, it's amusing. I think it's really amusing that I was concerned about catching viruses pre-pandemic. I removed my children from public school, or I should say my child, because the other one wasn't here yet and the other one was still a baby, but it's this very fond memory. I'm glad that I read through this with you guys. I have to say that a lot of them still ring very true. The violence in schools, I think, has gone down a lot, but also it's been a pandemic, so schools have kind of been closed. And I also have, I think, different reasons now. I think if you were to ask me to sit down and write a list now, it would be different. And guess what? I am going to, and that will be the next video. Probably not immediately after this one, but that will be another video coming up soon. So I hope that my list was able to help you. If you're someone who is considering homeschooling, again, this was the reasons why I started. I have I have a wide array of reasons why I continue to do it, but those were the things that were on my heart when I started. Another thing too that I would like to say is that I understand One, I know a lot of people might be confused because none of those reasons were religious, and they weren't. I didn't have a single religious reason for homeschooling. Uh, Sorry. I understand that that's a very big deal for some people, and those reasons may be on your list. I think the reason why I made this video was mostly one, to kind of talk about where my head was at before the world ended, and also just to encourage you to do it, because it really has been helpful for me. I have had some days where I felt like I wasn't doing very good, or that he wasn't doing very good, and I went back and I looked at this list, and yeah, it was very, like, rereading my reasons, it strengthened my resolve a little bit. It was good to remind me, why did you do this? You know, there were important reasons that you weighed heavily for a long time. This wasn't a spur of the moment decision. So I would highly encourage you, if you're beginning to homeschool, to write those reasons down. If you have been homeschooling for a while and you haven't ever written those reasons down, I would still encourage you to do it, because on those hard days, it's very helpful. And so that is going to be my video. I hope it was helpful for you. If you like this video, I would encourage you to subscribe. I make homeschooling and homemaking content, and yeah, I would love to see